Good morning, everyone. Well, we're wrapping up yet another exciting week at ASU+GSV in San Diego, and outside of some gloomy weather to start the week, I would tell you that this is probably one of the more energizing, excited, and certainly packed versions of this conference I can remember. So with that in mind, this panel is going to do its very best to exit us from the week with a ton of energy on a topic that's piqued a lot of interest for our industry. And that's the effort that many Edtech companies have undertaken in the last couple of years on building on their B2C business and now providing a B2C offering. Not a big shock. The global B2B e-commerce market is now at $17.9 trillion. The US market is 6, and that's 2x what it was in 2010. So not a shock, again, that we've got a trend emerging, and we've got a panel to talk about that. My name is John Farrar. I lead our higher ed and edtech business at Google, and joining me today is a star-studded panel of experts on this topic. This group of 5 is a mix of edtech founders, longtime education executives, and tech product experts that have been in the field for many, many years. So without further hesitation, let's make some introductions. I would love for each of the 5 of you to give me 2 things. 1, a brief intro, your name, who you are, where you work, maybe your history in the space, and then give me 1 word to describe launching B2B in 2023. Jamie, let's start with you. And by the way, you're quickly going to find out that my role here is to be the frame to the picture. So I think this will be an exciting panel, and I think Jamie is going to typify that right now.
Token female. So my name is Jamie Farrell. I've been fortunate enough to drive a ton of impact in some of the fastest growing companies in EdTech. So 2U was part of the founding team at Trilogy, General Assembly, Emeritus, and what was, and I don't have a job right now in case anyone's hiring. What was 1 word?
I just need 1 word to describe launching B2B.
Shit show.
That might be a contraction, but we'll take it. We'll take it.
I bet Greg agrees.
I do. My name is Greg Shove. I'm the CEO of Section. We're an online business school. We've educated 25,000 students in the last 4 years. We started a week before the pandemic struck and got lucky because the pandemic struck, and that drove demand through the roof. We initially were 80% consumer sales, actually 100% consumer sales initially, 80% in the first year. We're now 50-50 consumer to enterprise, and my goal, of course, in a couple of years is to be 75 enterprise and 25% of revenue being from consumer. And my 1 word for B2B in 2023 is don't do it.
We're establishing some personas here.
Interesting panel. Here, everybody is coming in to kind of see, we should go from B2C to B2B, and we're like, both of you are saying don't do it, and you kind of stole my words, but I'll have to make up something now. Shravan, Goli, Chief Operating Officer at Coursera, been there for 5 years, long career in general management operations, CEO of dictionary.com, so education, employment, etc. So this is really an inspiring field for me overall. On the B2B side, maybe I'll just frame it slightly differently. Be cautious.
Wow, I'm going to be the complete opposite and be more optimistic
about
the B2B space.
Got one end of the spectrum, and we're moving to the other end.
Hi, everyone. My name is Zayd, Badwan. I lead revenue and enterprise at a company called CoRise. We are a cohort-based learning platform with cohorts led by experts and powered by AI. So our cohorts scale to thousands of people, which is super exciting. Previously, I was with Coursera, working with Shravan for 5 years, leading global accounts and customer success. I think it's amazing that for a room full of educators and edtech people, you were all sitting in the back. So I know exactly how you were in school when all the seats in the front are completely open. The 1 word I would share is focus. And then I'll share a little bit more later on why.
Cool, thank you. It's so weird to be the last one. Hi, my name is Freddy Vega. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Platzi. Platzi is I hope, the largest technology school in Latin America. We have 4 million students all across Latin America. For a while, our claim to fame is that it actually works. Like most online education doesn't. It's okay. I know that you guys, Coursera, it's fine. You guys IPO'd. But completion rates have always been really low, and our completion rates have always been really high. The pandemic was great, and then 2023 has been an interesting year of learnings and acceptance and finding hobbies. And the one word, we have 4 million students, I think that you mentioned that. And the one word that I will use to describe B2B, just to be contrarian to all of you, is easy. It's easy.
We're running the gamut here. I love it. All right. Let's come back down to this end of the spectrum for a minute. Look, we've seen a lot of growth in B2B over the last 3 years, somewhat some volatile periods as well. But there has been this consistent trend of everybody getting into B2B. Jamie, maybe I'll start with you. Curious to understand why getting in the field, maybe why now it's taking off, and what factors do you need to assess before launching into the offering?
Great questions. I'll start with the first one, which is why do companies go into B2B? It's predictable, supposedly, right? Like if you can get through that first, let's call it year, it's a predictable business. And so you can also scale your impact, right? Like I think, we talk about it a lot in terms of revenue, but the reality is, and Freddy, you just mentioned 4 million students, you're not getting to 4 million people in 2 years on B2C. But if you go B2B, that is possible. And so I think, that's sort of the mission-driven reason, and part of the B2B revenue reason. I think, Zayd or Shravan, Coursera knocked it out of the park on like the switch from a revenue perspective. So you guys might have better perspective on this.
Sure, I can add, Zayd. So the question really is, if you are now thinking about from B2C to B2B, I always start with like first principles, like who is my customer? And let's think about the strategy is the intersection of who is the customer, what problem you're trying to solve for this customer, and then what is the opportunity? And when I think about the opportunity, is this a market that's big enough, but is this a market that's also growing, right? And then the last piece is, what is your competitive advantage? What is sort of the UVP, unique value proposition, that you can bring to the table? And so general assumption is like, okay, if you actually got that product market fit in general with consumer learners, you could falsely assume that you also have product market fit with enterprise customers. But as you think about kind of peel the onion, when you look at enterprise, you have multiple stakeholders. On the consumer case, that consumer is making the decision for themselves. In the enterprise, there's a different buyer, different user, different approver. These days, CFOs are getting involved in approving a lot of these deals. So you have to think about who are all the stakeholders. Is this coming through? Yes. Yeah, cool. Who are all the key stakeholders that you need to address? And so going back to the same thing, customer opportunity advantage, you have to think about all these customer types inside the enterprise.
Greg, maybe building off that on the stakeholder side, how do you think about navigating the different stakeholders on the B2B side?
Can I ask a question first of the audience?
Or always.
Yeah. Who here, if you could raise your hand, wants to make the transition or pivot from B2C to B2B? Why the rest of you here? No.
They're considering it.
Nice. Awesome. Great. So who's already done it, or who's in the middle of doing it? Great. Okay. I just good.
There's probably investors.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Just good to know.
There's at least one.
Yeah. I mean, the first thing I'd say about B2B is I do think we have to maybe it's first principles, or all of us step back and say answer some questions like what part of B2B or what part of enterprise. I mean, there's 3 segments in the U.S. in enterprise. Right, small, medium, and large. And they all behave very differently. And your go-to-market from consumer, if you're going to make the move to enterprise, will be very different based on one of those 3 segments. And I would argue you should pick one and not attempt all 3. I did attempt all 3 at Section in 2020 and 2021. And I learned a lot, and I can share that later. But I think you need to think about them as very different markets. SMB, mid-market. Mid-market I define as 500 to 5,000 employees, and 5,000 above is large enterprise. They behave differently. And the second is, do you have a customer, as we just mentioned, that is happy, where you have product market fit, and can you use them as your bridge into enterprise? We call that the consumer to enterprise flywheel. I'm just going to give you one data point, 1,000 to 1. Meaning 1,000 consumers, in our experience, I'm not sure about Coursera or others, 1,000 consumers will create one enterprise sale under $10,000. Less than one if you're trying to sell at a contract value of more than $10,000 in a larger enterprise. That's been our data over the last 3 years.
So I have a little bit of so I fully agree with what everybody's saying, but I have a bit of a shift in how I think about why B2B versus B2C. One, I think B2C is a really hard business for Edtech because an individual learner doesn't think about learning as like a lifelong experience. So they go to a B2C platform, they're like, I need to learn XYZ skill. They learn the skill and then they disappear. And being in the business of learning, you kind of want to build an experience where learners are continuously engaging with your platform. The B2B side of it does start to think and is starting to think differently about this culture of lifelong learning and understand that there is this like repeatable motion of developing skills that are both critical right now in terms of like what's my organization skilled at and what is going to be important for me to teach in the future. So like AI has been like the biggest buzzy thing that's happening at conference this week, and like it's like these two letters that no one will stop saying. We've all been talking about it for 4 or 5 months. Organizations are starting to think about how do I train thousands and thousands of people in skills like AI versus an individual saying, maybe I'll watch a YouTube video, maybe I'll talk to a friend, maybe I'll talk to a mentor. So to Jamie's point, like the B2B side of the business is more predictable. And I do know that like the economic times are tough. CFOs are getting involved in every single purchase. I was talking to somebody yesterday where I was like, the last 3 years were kind of like wild in many ways, where like companies could spend on literally anything. But if your learning product is solving a unique problem for an organization, which is why my one word was focus, they will still buy. Budgets haven't completely gone away. They're still there. It's just, have you actually found a problem that you are solving with the learning that you're providing? And the enterprises or the B2B side of the business, they are understanding of that, and they will look for solutions out there that will solve problems. And so it's a more predictable way of going to market because you onboard the learners, you keep the learners, and if you can create a great experience, those contracts renew year over year over year. And that's, if like in the EdTech space, that's kind of the space you want to be in.
I'm seeing
1 point.
I'm seeing Shravan and Jamie raise their mic, so I want to
Just 1 point, though. I mean, I think absolutely true, but ROI. So I think what it's coming down to is, at this juncture, there are lots of vendors competing for the same dollars. So I think that's the one thing. Like, we're all going in for, like in our case, like L&D budgets. And so the importance of making sure, like, hey, I can't spend what I was able to spend before. Now my spend is lower. First, I'm not going to spend it with 10 people as a result. So that consolidation is starting to happen now. Maybe in 2 years' time frame, things will be better and kind of, we'll have more options to explore. But then right now, then it's consolidation. But also then if I'm picking a vendor, then I'm just like, what is my ROI? And if you are going and trying to sell your product, first get some case studies established. Prove there is ROI. And the ROI comes from the fact that you're solving a specific problem, and that's where the focus comes into play. And then do you have the data and the insights that you can bring to the table to demonstrate that your product is actually making a difference?
And I will, sorry, 1 second, just to comment on that.
Me too.
Don't fight me.
Go.
But what I actually, and so to Shravan's point, like I actually challenge all of us, and it's a conversation we have very regularly at CoRise as well, which is we have kind of been hand-wavy in the EdTech space about what results from learning actually mean. And we've used what I refer to as like vanity metrics for the most point, which is they logged in or they clicked something. But organizations in times when they get tough want to understand, what did this learner do because they learned this skill? And we don't know, and I don't think any of us really know what the answers are, but as you think about going into the B2B space, I think we have to start answering that question so that the learning executive can go to the CFO and say, this is why we have to spend this money.
I want Jamie to jump in here, and then I'm going to go to Freddy in a second.
So a couple of things on what both of them said. So specifically on the ROI piece, excuse me, I'm sure this is surprising. I have no patience. Like, I don't want to do a pitch. I don't want to do a pitch at all. So I walk in with a spreadsheet, right? Like, here's a spreadsheet. It's an ROI calculator. Like, and I'll use an example. With Sales Impact Academy, I literally flipped up one slide, and it was a pipeline. And I said, pick a metric. We'll pull up a calculator. We'll tell you what we've done in the past, and we'll see if we can increase it. And if not, like, I don't want to waste your time because, frankly, like, Coursera does have great courses for you, right? And so I think that's the first thing. The second thing, you guys, I think, so I want to go back. Greg was talking about sort of narrowing your focus to one of the three segments. And so one of the learnings that I had that I would share with you, there's this book called Levers. And if you read the first, I don't even know, let's call it 20 pages, it talks about ICP and how the more narrow your ICP is, like, the more you're going to learn, and then you get bigger and bigger and bigger. And so I would say, to Greg's point, do exactly what Greg said, and then continue and make it as narrow as possible to the point of, like, not just industry, but they've raised somewhere between $3 million and $5 million in the last 12 months. Like, get as narrow as possible and have every one of those calls. And I've never seen this happen, but in the book, what it would say is, like, you found product market fit within your ICP if you have 100% close rate. And so I'm just going to use Coursera. I didn't want to go up against Coursera when I was at my last business. Like, I just didn't. And we didn't go for the L&D budget. Like, our ICP was had nothing to do with the L&D budget. We went straight to the CRO to sell sales programs, highly effective, and we just said, hold on hiring these 4 people, or think of us as part of your tech stack, right? So that's another way to think about it. We're part of your tech stack. So if you're getting X, dollars in ROI from Gong, imagine if you remove Gong, or imagine if you remove SalesLoft, or imagine if you remove any of those products and put us in there. And so, that's just some learnings and ways that we thought about ICP that allowed us to grow pretty quickly by not going against you guys.
Got it. Greg, it looks like you've got a comment, but I want to go to Freddy here for a second. Freddy, you said this is easy. So I think everybody's dying to know why it's easy. When you went into B2B, was there a maturation point you felt like you needed to be at B2C? Or talk to us a little bit about why you think it's easy and kind of where your evolution started with Platzi.
I actually don't think it's easy. I just wanted to be contrarian to you guys because you said all the things that I wanted to say. But in our case, we created B2B, the B2B side of our business, out of necessity because we started B2C. B2C was growing, and suddenly we started noticing a bunch of companies signing up for B2C en masse. So like a bunch of company.com. Like, let's give them some services. So we started giving them some services, and they didn't care. Like it did a little bit of a difference, but not like a significant difference. They just wanted the service. Eventually, what I found, and it took us a long time to understand this, is that just like in B2C, mostly it's extremely rare to have intellectual curiosity, and most of our companies have a significantly smaller total addressable market that we want to admit because people don't want to learn. And companies is worse, like significantly worse, but it's also better because companies can make people do things. So the way that it works is that you just go and ask the decision maker what it needs, and what they need is always very contrarian to our hopeful missions. So we want to prepare the world. We want to, in our case, what Platzi wants to do is we want to break the cycle of poverty in Latin America. And Latin America is like very particular for many reasons. But what companies want is not that at all. Companies want, oh no, just the government is making me do this, so just like help me not get sued. or I need to train all these people into this very specific topic. Can you do the very specific topic? And that's it. So for example, I've been discussing with some companies in the past months, like post-pandemic. And one of the companies, what they wanted was for people to suck less at remote work. And that was it. Like, what does that mean? And then we start talking with them, and it's so easy. And the other thing that I understood is we have it in our database of courses, in the content that we create, in the activities that we do. We have everything they needed, but they didn't know because it was packed in a way to entice the student to learn, not in a way to help the executive to understand how to make it mandatory for them. And that was it. That was all there was to it. And then when you think about it, like the larger issue, that we have two big issues in education. One is that we don't want to talk about the asteroid, LLMs and everything. We really don't. Like, I've been here in all of these panels, and everybody tries to avoid the subject. They're very hopeful. Oh yeah, no, LLMs are going to be fantastic, and we're going to have all this multiplication of blah, blah, blah. It's an asteroid. It's a super huge asteroid. And we don't want to talk about it. And issue number two is that people don't want to learn. People don't want to. If people wanted to learn, they will read a book. People don't want to learn. But when they get education through B2B, the system can force them to learn. And if we are crafty about it, we can do it in a way that is good for everybody, for employees, for employers, for the economy, for our businesses. But it also means letting go of the cool part of what we do. I think that education is extremely addictive. The reason why we are in this market, which sucks, is that it's very rewarding. There are no big companies in education. There are 0 big companies in education. When you compare it to, unless you consider the companies that have been around for like 1,000 years. There are 0 large companies in education, none. Or like private equity and consolidation and stuff like that. But it's so cool because we get the rewards. We get to see how people grow. We get to see how we impact our students. So it's very addictive. And it's really great. I love it here. But to succeed in B2B, like those values don't work. We just have to go to, and it's good. It's a good thing because then through the system of B2B, people get forced to learn what they actually need.
Yeah, on that front line, I think we're all here because it is that exciting space and we can make a difference. And I do think you're right on the upskilling element, forcing people into education and them probably finding joy in it, maybe against their will, as you're describing.
I don't want to force people into education.
That's right.
Well, maybe Freddy feels a little bit differently, but let's talk about the buyer on the education, on the corporate side or on the enterprise side. Zayd, I'll start with you. Research will tell you that maybe B2C consumers and B2B have at least this one characteristic in common, that they start with an evoked set of suppliers or vendors. And then often they buy from that. Are we finding that on the B2B side? I'll start with Zayd. I would love to hear Shravan's opinion, and maybe we'll work our way back down here.
So it's yes and no, and it's super complex. And I think the comment that was made earlier on the like 1 to 1,000 is very similar to what I've seen both at Coursera and at CoRise. And the reality is that on the B2B side, there are 2 types of buyers. There's the learning buyer and the functional buyer. The functional buyer is like the technical buyer, right? This is a person that actively feels pain in their team around a skill gap that they're experiencing. This buyer is incredibly hard to convert from B2C to B2B because learning is just like not their top 20 priorities. And so they might come to your platform, you might see like 15 people from Walmart show up in a single course with at walmart.com, and then you call and you email and you message and you LinkedIn and you stalk and you show up at their house and they never call you back. And you're like, why is this not converting? And it's because this person just like simply doesn't care about broader skilling and they don't think about long-term education. So when you think about the B2B buyer, there are these like transactional experiences you have where sometimes they will buy like a $10,000 contract because they simply want to like fill a skill gap that they're experiencing. But what we've learned has been really strategic is to use the data from our consumer platform to circle back around with the learning buyer who does think about learning. And to answer your question a bit more, John, is like, what is the B2B buyer thinking about? They are, and I believe, transforming to a place where they're wanting to provide learning opportunities that's more of a sort of like the learners are asking for it versus we are pushing it. And so for a long time, and like the democratization of edtech and what's happened over the past 10 years is we've seen this like huge explosion of on-demand learning, but the reality is that on-demand learning is actually really hard to like interact with and learn and move through. And so we've sort of started to put on. I ran customer success at Coursera for 5 years, and I was like basically saying, force your people to take these courses. And they're this, I think we're gonna like start to experience this pushback from the learner pool. And so I think it's sort of up to all of us to create learning experiences where learners are like banging on our door versus us banging on their door. I don't think that the typical adult wants to learn in the modalities that we have delivered to them thus far, or in the experiences that we have delivered to them thus far. But I do think that folks are looking around and thinking, I do need to upskill, reskill, change. I don't know what the hell AI means or what ChatGPT means, and I need to learn these things. Where do I go to learn it? So the B2B buyer is often coming into conversation saying, I kind of know the big players in the market, but I want to understand what is a platform that's able to close my skill gap in a really scalable way where learners are going to really enjoy it and I don't have to force them? Because, I mean, I don't know if there's any Gen Zers here, but good luck forcing a Gen Zer to do anything anymore. My generation, you could convince us to do things, you could force us to do things pretty regularly, but I think that like the time is going to run up on us being like mandatory learning when it comes to things like data science and AI. So they want to know it's a good learning experience, and I see Jamie snickering over here, so I'm going to pass to Jamie.
I was just saying we should hear, legitimately I was saying we should hear from Greg because he's funny and we haven't heard that much from him.
So if you were to start a company today and pitch investors on that idea, you'd probably have more success if you convinced investors that you spoke to at least 100 prospects, and maybe more. And in fact, the best entrepreneurial classes taught at business schools in the US, that's kind of what the class is. You don't graduate from the class and write the business plan until you've talked to literally 100 stakeholders. Yet I see B2C edtech companies all the time jumping to B2B with almost no research. And one reason is because you get 10 customers really easily. And my advice to you is ignore the first 10. They're like friends and family. They are false signals. And the reason I said in 2023, don't do this, is I think you need to take a year to figure out who is your buyer, in what segment, what is your value prop, do you have a recurring revenue model, because that is the point of moving to B2B, is to exploit or take advantage of, as the entrepreneur, a recurring revenue business. That's why they're more highly valued, and that's why the revenue is more predictable. Do you have case studies? Do you have referrals? All that stuff takes a year. Don't do what everybody does, which is in 3 months, jump to B2B, land 10 sales, and then create a revenue forecast. Because you'll miss the revenue forecast, and everybody will be upset. You know, your spouse, your board, whatever, your management team, your employees, because it's just a false signal. Take the time and try to figure this out, and then move. And I do think in 2023, if you do move, your signals will be false because of the recession. So don't judge yourself harshly if you don't get the results you want in the next 12 to 18 months. Because I do think what's going on is, you know, we do have the CFO now running the company. And so I think that, you know, you're going to not have the kind of success you will have, I would expect and hope, and I hope for my company in 2025.
Shravan, I can see you want to jump in there.
I'm happy to add a little bit more additional color, I would say. So fundamentally, I kind of go back to this idea. If you are trying to get into the B2B and you're trying to influence the buyer, that's kind of what the main question was. And then you have to have a lot of evidence that the number of other buyers care. That's what you're talking about, right? Just establishing that evidence. But at the same time, you're talking about like, well, it's just not the buyer, and you can force learning onto the individuals. The employers also care about, employees also care about what you're trying to offer. So when you're trying to build this evidence, you have to triangulate all of these different pieces of data. And one of the things that we've introduced as a framework, which is called Product Market Fit Framework inside Coursera, is the 6Ps. Who's the persona? What problem you're solving for that persona? What is the unique proposition to that persona? So if this is the buyer, an L&D buyer or a functional buyer. I actually think there's going to be, depending on what solution, what product, problem you're trying to solve, you could actually wedge in any different direction. Like if you actually go to the L&D buyer today, I think if you're starting up, you're going to be in a lot of pain because they are just not listening to like a lot of smaller companies anymore, right? They're just like vendor consolidation, cheapest, lowest possible offering, check mark, so that is a benefit that I can offer to my employees. But on the other hand, the pain is still in the tech organization. The pain is still in the data organization. The pain is still in all these different functions that are trying to accomplish something. So if you can actually, in the early stages, if you're solving that problem and have a proposition to one of those buyers, I would encourage you to actually go to those buyers versus the L&D buyers. They do have special budget. And that budget is basically they need to provide efficiency, they need to deliver scale, they need to deliver productivity, etc. So they're going to look for that. Then you think about, okay, it's persona, problem, proposition. What's your product? What's your solution? Right? And then what is your positioning? And that's where competitors, don't ignore competitors. Especially, like you said, like Coursera, I appreciate that, but don't ignore competitors. And so what is your positioning within the competitive field is important. A lot of times you kind of, in a startup world, and like even it happens in companies like ours, it's like we drink our own Kool-Aid. And that's the thing you got to stop, right? And the last thing is the promotion, go-to-market strategy. And I think you talked about a strategy that we have actually leveraged quite a bit, which is using your consumer learner base to understand which enterprises are actually using your product. So a lot of consumer learners sign up with their employee email addresses. And so we looked at, like, I think in 2020 we had this data point, 40%, more than 40% of our enterprise leads were coming from our consumer learner base. And then when you go to this initial, like, okay, then you say, it's like, what can I provide evidence initially? But you have a consumer offering. And if you can actually see which of these companies these consumers belong to, go to those companies. It's like classic strategy, right? Slack used this strategy. A lot of these companies use this strategy. Go to those employers, go to those functional buyers, and actually show that, hey, by the way, did you know these 100 or 200 or 300 of your employees are actually using this product today? And this is what they're doing, by the way. But guess what? You actually have no clue what skills they're developing, how those skills are being effective, how they're useful in your job and context. But if you can actually buy the solution from me today, essentially you as the buyer, you can control the spend with these employees are spending, but also you can actually benefit and understand and benchmark your talent against the gaps that you're looking for, and then create a program that encourages them or the other employees.
And I agree with that. Just use my math, please. It's 1,000 consumers to one enterprise sale. We're not all Coursera or Udemy for business. I mean, I really want to amplify what Jamie said. Think about big niches. We don't want to compete with Coursera. We think about big niches, tiny niches that are big.
No, we want Coursera to buy us.
Okay.
Now
we're getting off the rails.
Now I could be funny, but I won't.
I'm floored. I worry about competition every day, and what keeps me up at night is like our own competitors, so I appreciate that.
Freddie, I can see you raising the mic. I want to make sure you get a chance to jump in, and then I want to wrap up this section on just organizational setup, and I want to ask each of you on that as we wrap up. I want to make sure, Freddie, anything on the B2B buyer that you think is unique from your market perspective?
Yeah. From what I have seen, there are normally three kinds of reasons why companies want to acquire something that does education in B2B. I mentioned one which was compliance, but there's one that it's more common, or at least that I see that is more common, which is talent retention. This used to be super important in 2021 when we were all drunk, and it's no longer as important, but it's still important depending on the niche that we're fulfilling. and it's one of the easiest to measure. Like you give them this, and then my larger customer right now, which is like 3,000 students, the only reason why they use us, they use Platzi, is employee retention, the only one. And then there's the third one, which is the one that we hope for, that they need to upskill something and then they get a competitive advantage. From my limited experience, often that only works if they're afraid of a very specific thing. If the company, it only wants to like it's in peacetime and they want to grow, blah, 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 it will be just the thing that they have, but it will not be used. But if they're afraid of something in the market, something in a competitor, something, a skill that they're not developing, then they suddenly run for it, which is what we're seeing with AI. Because I think that this thing will eventually be like mobile phones in every single role that we believe, and in way wilder ways than we right now understand. We still don't know how all roles will be changed by having something that is super intelligent and extremely fast and multimodal. We are not there yet, but we'll be there in 24 months. And that will affect almost every single industry, which means that there's a lot of opportunity for what Jamie was saying, like finding specific niches of just a different kind of learning that the learning that we have been grown used to. I think it's actually a great time to go towards B2B, but just keep the 1,000 to 1 rule.
So with that in
I will
mind,
keep that to heart.
you all have set up this as part of your organizations. We've got under 4 minutes left. I need 30 seconds from each of you on what to keep in mind when you're setting up your orgs for success in B2B. Greg, I'm going to start with you, and then I'll start selecting at random.
Don't do what I did in 2021 or 22. Do what I'm doing this year, which is you are responsible, you personally, for sales. So every week, every day, you wake up and you take responsibility to reach out to 5 prospects and 1 customer. I'm just going to add one thing. In a year from now, I'll say one thing first. Don't be tempted to sell annual contracts. I get it. You push the renewal out a year and you get the money now. Don't do it. Your first few deals do monthly. Subscription, paid monthly. Why? They can get out. Why? You want to find out. Do you have product market fit? Sooner you find out, the less money and time you will waste.
Love that. Jamie.
I was going to say the same thing. No, actually not as eloquently, of course, but don't, and this could be provocative or controversial, don't hire a sales team, right? And you know, I would say don't just do sales yourself, but set yourself a goal. Speak to 100, pick something. Speak to 100 CTOs in 50 days. Work backwards from what your goals are. And you're not just head of sales, which, I mean, you are head of sales. We've talked a lot about sales today, but product as well, right? So where's the feedback loop? What are you hearing? And so, yeah, I'm double downing on the sales.
Zayd.
So similar to like what you've heard from all of us today, my biggest piece of advice is to listen. Because I mean, I have in the past year talked to over 200 prospects with CoRise, and it is very easy to want to just immediately start pitching to see the reaction. And the reality is that the L&D space is like the nicest human beings you will ever work with, and they will tell you it's great no matter what you tell them. So instead, listen, ask questions, build your own discovery skills so that you understand what is the problem that you're going to be able to solve with the product that you're building, and stay open to understand, like, do we need to go in a different direction if we're going to go down the B2B track?
Freddie, I'm going to go to you, and then Shravan's going to bring us home.
It's pretty much the same. It's talking to users. What I have found is try to talk to the highest decision maker that you can reach, and yeah, just listen. When you talk to them, you're going to find wildly different pains and needs, and just try to understand them as human beings. Like, this year is very weird for every single industry, which means that the way that education products are going to change is also going to be very, very different and counterintuitive, and definitely radically different from how we approach B2C. So just try to listen and try to reach the highest decision maker possible.
All right.
Drop the mic, Shravan.
What else can I add? I just like maybe simplify this to context of hypothesize, test, learn. Hypothesize, test, learn, right? Shortest, fastest, cheapest possible way to learn is what's going to get you. The other thing I will just say from an operational standpoint, don't underestimate the go-to-market challenges. Ultimately, you have a whole different motion. When you're thinking about consumer, you're not thinking about sales, you're not thinking about SDRs, you're not thinking about product marketing, you're not thinking about sales operations, sales enablement, Salesforce, whole bunch of stuff. But you don't have to think about all of that stuff on day one, as Greg's talking about it. But as you ramp up, those things become real problems. And you will have to kind of have a view of like how that might actually cause challenges. So creating leverage in your business from grounds up becomes important. So one of the big things that we look at is like what's common across consumer, enterprise, and how can we actually double down on the common stuff and then try to kind of automate or minimize the impact on sort of the specific things.
Perfect. Thank you all. The Academy Awards music is playing, so I think that's our cue. Appreciate everybody coming in. Thanks to our panelists. Great chat.